Yes, hello, David Bradley here. I was just going to move this super pet inside when I came upon another treasure. Um, and I'm trying to think if I even ever had one of these. I don't think I did, because I think I ended up with the 1200 baud version, which I think was the 1670. But here is the Commodore model 1660 Modem 300. And for those of us who were into bulletin boards, originally, when bulletin boards began, 300 baud, or about 30 characters a second, was as good as it got. It was not so slow that, like, some people, I suppose, could type faster, maybe, than 30 characters a second. It wasn't bad. It was actually a nice, comfortable reading speed. If you were to sign on to a BBS when the text started scrolling across the screen, you could pretty much keep up without having to pause or do anything like that, whereas with the faster speeds, you certainly would have to pause, and many times, of course, they would automatically stop when you got to how much would fill up a page. But this is, this goes back to the days of the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64, and if I remember rightly, and I think I do, this is the modem that, when you bought it, it came with a Commodore phone, which looked like a regular sort of Bell phone. It had just a dial on it, not digipulse or not tone, but just a dial. And the reason was, most phones, at least in Canada at the time, did not have modular cords between the handset and the phone part, because what you had to do was disconnect the handset and take the wire and stick it into the modem, which, of course, if your phone didn't have such cords that had plugs on them, and they were hardwired and screwed in, as most of the phones of the day were, you couldn't use it. So they sold it with a phone, which I believe now the phones have been highly prized. I had one for a very long time, but many years ago, one of my standard poodles of the day took a liking to it, and it wasn't quite the end of the phone, but almost. So, excuse me, sorry, I really don't know if I have the remnants of the dog-chewed phone in a box somewhere. Knowing me, I probably do. So this, the 1660, was quite a bit different than the 1670, not just for the speed, but also the 1670 used these commands, which at the time were sort of kind of a standard. They were, I'm not sure who developed, but certainly they were, they became popular on the modems that were made by Hayes, H-A-Y-E-S, and you could just send it commands and it would dial and do things for you. Whereas, not that this couldn't do some of the same things, it just wasn't so easy, and you definitely had to have a terminal program that was made specifically, to go with the 1660 in order to get it to do what you wanted to do, and all such as that. So, as I said, 300 baud wasn't terrible for typing. It certainly was an adventure when it came to downloading, because, you know, programs, although they were pretty small at the time compared to what we have now, they could take some time to download. But, you know, with all the downloading different protocols and things, there was error checking. So mostly, if you did get the file, it was usually okay. It was very rare I ever remember downloading something and having it fail and having to do it again. And since most bulletin boards were local, it didn't cost anything. It just took some time. And some people, of course, would, if it was a large program or a file or whatever it was, you know, set it up to start to download and maybe go and have dinner, come back and see how it was going. My brother and I and another fellow, well, it started with my brother and I, ran a bulletin board, and eventually we had 4 different phone lines. It was not networked though, as in you could sign on, you'd have to phone any of the 4 different numbers and get on. 2 of them were for downloading, and the other 2 had message capability. Me. And they became part of what was called the punternet. And the punternet was quite interesting in that you could send messages from one board to another that were on the punternet, and as long as they were bulletin boards that were local to each other, for example, one of our message boards was in Mississauga, which I think at the time was local to Burlington and other such areas, but not local to Toronto, or the Burlington certainly wasn't. But you could send a message, say from our board in Toronto, and if it was destined to a board that was in Burlington or Hamilton or other places that were local to Mississauga, the messages would be in the middle of the night. Our bulletin board would call our other bulletin board and send the messages to there, and then that bulletin board would call the one that was local to it. And it would do that as much as possible. Even if it couldn't do that, it certainly lessened, if not eliminated, most long-distance charges. Because not all the boards could bounce from one to another. But, you know, if there were enough of them, it was a good idea, and those were the pioneer days before the internet, where basically we had one computer at one person's house, sitting waiting to answer the phone, and when one person on their one phone line called in, assuming the number wasn't busy, they could get on and they could read messages and share stories, and you know, there was no sort of chatting, or except when if there was something going on and the system operator, otherwise known as the sysop, decided that for whatever reason they wanted to chat with you, they could go into this thing. And it was always very scary when it happened, when it came up and it would say direct sysop communication, which I found quite scary. I was young at the time. We changed ours, because you can go in and edit these things easily enough. We changed ours to chat mode, which seemed much more friendly than direct sysop communication. So that is what we did. So there was no chatting as such, but certainly messages could be sent back and forth and shared. And the bulletin boards were a magical place back in the early days. Not that the internet is not a magical place. It is indeed. It really has, I mean, it's almost become like when you move into somewhere, well, we need water, we need electricity, we need heat, and oh yeah, what about Wi-Fi? Or, you know, internet, something. It's almost, if it isn't already a utility item, it certainly is well on the way to being sort of like, I think a lot of people would be shocked if somebody did not have access to Wi-Fi or the internet, or, you know, there's always a lot of talk about making such things accessible to far off places in Canada so that they too can live a civilized existence. Anyway, so here we have a Commodore model 1660 300 baud modem. Now, does it work? I don't know. But like this Super Pet that it's sitting on, I will take this inside and I will look through and I will find the terminal program, and probably the hardest thing it's going to be is to find something to phone with it. Or not, sorry, I should be able to hook it up and phone, but I'm not sure if there's many sort of old style bulletin boards around to test it with. But certainly if it dials out and such, that's a good indication. I will have to Google that, as they say, and see what I can find. So here it is, a vintage part of Commodore history, sitting on another older part of Commodore history. Thank you for coming. Stay tuned. Soon, on further episodes, we'll see if this modem works. We'll see if the Super Pet works, or if some parts of it work. And maybe we'll all end up being just a little bit wiser and a little bit smarter. But certainly, we'll know a little bit more about the history of Commodore. So, once again, thank you for coming. I remain at your service, David Bradley, signing off.